At the end of chapter 10, Isaiah used trees as metaphors, and now here in 11, he uses a tree again. This time, the stem or trunk of the tree is likened to Christ, and a rod or shoot that comes from this trunk is a servant to come forth in the last days. It seems to me that we can liken this rod or shoot to Joseph Smith, for as Moroni told Joseph, this prophecy would soon be fulfilled in the days to come. So let's try to identify all the metaphors in verse 1. In Hebrew, the word for stem means lower part of the trunk of a tree, or as some translate it, the stump. As we see in section 113, this stump represents Christ, but it may also represent Christianity. As Christ's life was cut off at an early age, so his true church was also cut off through apostasy just a short time later. The second metaphor, a rod, comes from the word hoter, which means a shoot or water sprout. Think of an oak that has been cut down. In time, water sprouts will spring forth from the stump. The Doctrine and Covenants identifies this rod or water sprout as a servant in the hands of Christ. Again, this is most likely Joseph Smith. But interestingly, shoots or water sprouts are almost always barren of fruit, or in this case, the mature fruit of Zion. The third metaphor is wanaser, or branch, which some experts translate as a graft. Thus, it appears that the rod or water sprout will be cut off at some point, and a branch will be grafted onto it. Remember, like the Savior, Joseph Smith was cut off from mortality at an early age. But not only Joseph himself, but also the redemption of Zion in Jackson County was halted. Indeed, since then, Zion has been waiting nearly 200 years for its redemption. So, if Joseph Smith was a rod that was cut off, then there will need to be another servant grafted in, a servant who will complete Joseph's work and produce the full fruit of Zion. Well, that's a lot of metaphors to take in. So, perhaps by combining the information here in verse 1 with D&C 113, 3-6, we can take some license and paraphrase the verse this way. And a servant shall come forth from the Savior, even Joseph Smith Jr., who shall be a descendant of both David and Ephraim, and on whom shall be laid much power. Then another servant shall branch forth from Joseph's roots, who will also be a descendant of David and Ephraim, and unto whom will rightly belong the priesthood and the keys of the kingdom, for he shall be an ensign for the gathering of Israel in the last days. In other words, the rod or shoot, which was the first servant in the restoration, was cut off before he could bear the full fruit of Zion. So a second servant, a branch grafted onto this shoot, will finish establishing Zion and will also gather in the righteous of the house of Israel. Again, as I see it, this first servant is Joseph Smith, who restored the gospel among the Gentiles and died early. And the second is the ensign, the servant of Christ, who will fully raise up Zion and gather in the natural branches of Israel. And he will also become a light to the Gentiles around the world. Then, as we see later, this servant will introduce the righteous into the millennium. This analogy may also be extended to the restored church. After being founded, the church did not initially bear the fruit of Zion, but after being pruned and then strengthened by the natural branches of Israel being grafted back in, the restored church will indeed bear all the fruit of Zion. And this is just the first verse of one of the greatest chapters of Isaiah. The conciseness and breadth of these few words are awesome. Indeed, they've staggered and defied the understanding of many for generations. The rest of this chapter refers to this servant, the branch, who is an ensign raised up for the gathering of scattered Israel around the earth. This man will lead them to the lands of their inheritances in Jerusalem or New Jerusalem. As we will see, this is a man of power and wisdom, a prophet who cannot be cut short in his work. For, as the Lord said through Joseph Smith, the redemption of Zion must needs come by power. Therefore, I will raise up unto my people a man who shall lead them like as Moses led the children of Israel. For ye are the children of Israel, and of the seed of Abraham, and ye must needs be led out of bondage by power, and with a stretched out arm. And as your fathers were led at the first, even so shall the redemption of Zion be. And thus, Here in chapter 11, verse 1, Isaiah's timeline continues. The latter-day servant of Christ is a branch who will be grafted onto the continuing work of the restoration, the work that Joseph Smith, the rod, commenced. Both are servants of Christ in the last days, but in the Doctrine and Covenants, only one is called an ensign. Before that, as we have seen, a counterfeit ensign will show up first. And then the true ensign, the latter-day servant of Christ, will appear, as prophesied of in chapters 6 and 11. Next time, we'll dive into the rest of this amazing chapter of Latter-day Prophecy. And all of this is explained in greater detail in the book, The Words of Isaiah. I'm Curtis Taylor with The Words of Isaiah.